introduce you to the second half of the Honors Conference today, and our next presenter, Garrett, our very own Millsaps Coca-Cola Scholar. He is doing his honors in economics under Dr. Fender, and it is called Let's Make a Payment, Analyzing Mortgage Delinquency in Community. Two interesting facts about him. One of his role models is Ron Swanson, and the other one is Frank Underwood, and he is an avid Netflixer.
Guilty as charged. So my project is an econometric logistic regression on delinquency and mortgage lending. So let's start off with that in some normal terms. So the question is, what makes borrowers delinquent on their mortgages? What makes them fall behind on their payment schedule? Let's first begin by talking about what a mortgage is exactly. So a mortgage is a loan given by a bank to a borrower with the mortgage property, the house, acting as collateral for the loan. The borrower agrees to repay the full amount of the mortgage plus interest, or the bank can foreclose on the home. The amount of the mortgage is divided monthly over the life of the mortgage. Those are the monthly payments. The borrower is expected to meet these monthly payments, and if he or she fails to, the mortgage enters into delinquency. Once a mortgage becomes delinquent, it can either, the borrower can catch back up on his payment schedule or remain in delinquency. After 90 days, delinquency becomes default. At this point, the lender, the bank, can foreclose on the property and take the borrower's home. So my question, as I say at the beginning, is what makes these borrowers delinquent in the first place? So to understand the analysis to follow and the literature in this area, there's a couple key terms we need to understand. So FICO, this is an acronym that represents the borrower's credit score. A credit score is a quantitative estimate of a borrower's past payment history or failure to pay on time. It can also be converted into the likelihood that a borrower will default on a mortgage within 2 years after the mortgage is taken out. Next term is LTV. It stands for loan to value. That is the amount of the mortgage over the amount the value of the property. It can also be thought of the equity an owner has in the home. Equity can be thought of as the margin of safety. The larger the amount of equity an owner has in their home, the more negative property price movements they can absorb before becoming underwater, to the point where they owe more on the home than the home is worth. Next is the Inc. AMI, and this is a percentage indicating how much the particular borrower makes relative to the average borrower in his or her income track. So why does this matter? Why is this an important question to study, and what can we learn from it? So there's two sides of this equation, the borrower and the lender. For the borrower, late payments jeopardize their current financial livelihood and their future financial livelihood. Becoming delinquent on their loan will damage the borrower's credit score and make it more difficult for them to secure loans in the future. As I said, a delinquent loan can allow a bank to foreclose on the home, and this is a problem for low and middle income families, especially because homes represent such a large part of their financial equity in their lives. On the other side of the equation, delinquent loans complicate lending operations significantly. It creates a liquidity issue because lenders don't know when, if ever, their funds will be returned, and if enough loans go delinquent enough times, it can cause the lenders to cut down the number of mortgages they make. Ultimately, the mortgages made will be made at a higher cost to those borrowers that can secure mortgages. In this study, we use a lender who is a community development financial institution, and their goal is to spread financial capital and literacy throughout the Deep South. So in their case, a delinquent loan inhibits their ability to exercise their mission. So let's talk about what exactly econometrics is. So the best way to relate this is to relate to the hard sciences. In the hard sciences, a scientist would take a group of genetically identical rats, say, if he was testing the effects of a new drug, divide them into a test group and a control group, and only administer the drug to one group. Now, obviously, we cannot do this with humans for a couple reasons. Some would argue it's immoral. But also, economic data is often from past events. So we're looking back in time to estimate these variables. And so we use statistics, namely regression, to generate a quantitative estimate of the impact of a change in that variable on the dependent variable, with every other variable held at its mean. Now, the impact is given by the coefficient, and we'll work through this equation here at the bottom to give a practical understanding. But this brings us to two important ideas in economics. The first is ceteris paribus. This means all else held equal. So as I said, the way to interpret the coefficient is the impact of that variable with all the variables held constant. Second is marginal impact. The actual number for the coefficient represents the change in the dependent variable after a 1 unit change in the independent variable. And so if we were, say, building an equation to estimate GPA, and we were to hold our study constant and increase the ACT score of this particular student by 1, we would expect his or her GPA to increase by a 1/10 of a point. Conversely, if we were to increase our study and ACT constant, we would expect his or her GPA to increase by 2/10 of a point. All right, so relating this to the literature, this study is unique in 3 ways. First of all, we are studying delinquency instead of default. The majority of the studies in this sphere study default for 2 reasons. First is that default is more costly relative to delinquency for lending agencies, and so there's more backing for research in the area. Second is the modeling issues of modeling delinquency. You don't know what is a true delinquency and what is, say, when a borrower forgot to mail the payment on time, or the payment got lost in the mail. So for that reason, we define in this study delinquent as a loan that is more than 60 days behind on payments. The origin of the data set is also unique, and that is because we're using, as I said earlier, data from a community development financial institution instead of a bank or a mortgage company. And so I believe this will attract a different type, this type of organization appeals to a different type of borrower. The other interesting part of the study is we produced unique results for the loan age variables. Previous studies have seen an increasing and then decreasing parabolic relationship between loan age and delinquency, though they peaked at different times. In this study, as we'll talk a little bit more about later, we saw an increasing and increasing relationship. In general, after consulting the literature and economic theory, it was believed that adverse income, property value, or payment variables would increase delinquency, while the converse would decrease delinquency. So now we'll look at descriptive statistics and try and wrap our head around the group of borrowers we're analyzing. So as we can see from the mean of the DQ variable representing delinquency, about 12% of these borrowers are delinquent on their loans. You can see significant variation in the loan amount. The average loan was about $80,000, but we had some as small as $16,000 and some as high as $371,000. We see significant variation in income as well, $10,000 to $214,000 annually. And if we look down here, we can see that 69% of the borrowers identify as a minority, 56% identify as female. These variables here, with the T's in front of them, are tract level variables. They represent the neighborhood status